Hey guys, Joe here from SimVRlabs, and now it's going to get really fun. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to clean up a few things, and we are going to code up a condition where the starter on your 172 does not actually fire. It turns over, but it doesn't fire until a certain time has passed, based on it being very cold out, right? So if it's cold out, make it harder to start is basically what we're going to do, okay? It's going to end up feeling and acting very SimCoder-ish, right? So we'll get into that. It's going to teach you some more about coding, and it's going to make a pretty cool little plugin for your 172. Now, you'll notice up here, I've already done the work of figuring out what datarefs I want to manipulate to be able to do that, but we'll go through, we'll just talk about what I chose and why, right? Also, before we get going on that, I want to change the names of these. Like I said, these are the XLUA power functions, but in FlyWithLua they're not power functions. So to avoid any future confusion, let's just call this one like initialization, right? And we'll call this one, because this is its own little function bucket, and all it's doing is doing the speed door thing. So we can call this speed door. Yeah, speed door close. Speed door close. I can change that to this, and then this one needs to be here. Now, the other thing is for performance sake, this one for sure, speed door close, it doesn't have to be called every frame. I don't necessarily need it to change. If I'm 30 frames a second, I don't need it to check every frame whether the aircraft speed is this and then close the door. I can get by with it checking that every second. So that will literally check it 30 times less than normal and still enough to get the job done. So I can change this, instead of do every frame, to do often, right? So that's going to save in just a little bit of performance. Now, will you notice a FPS boost? No, but you would if this was a giant thing. So like I said, this is just good practice. Is there anything else we can set? Can we set this one to do often? Well, probably. I'm not sure. It does it once a second, but I'm not sure if it does it the first frame of the first second, and then it waits through all the frames till the next frame of the next second. My guess would be yes. So this will probably still work if I change this to do often, and that would be fine, most likely. Okay, so let's get into our next part, right? Now what I want to do first is, before I actually code this up, I usually like to write it out, and I like to write out the logic of what exactly I'm trying to do. Right, so we're going to do that in just a second. Let's go over these datarefs that I found. So in searching for this, I figured, okay, I want it to not start easily when it's cold. So is there a dataref for cold? Well, so I did some searching, and yes, of course, there's datarefs for temperature and a bunch of other things, but I didn't necessarily just want like outside air temperature. What I was really concerned about was something like oil temp, right? And oil temperature is an array dataref, so there's like different ones for if you had different engines on your airplane. So we're a 0 on our array dataref, just like the door opens 0. This is oil temperature. So I found that I don't want to write to it, I just want to read from it, so I made it read only, right? This mag1 and mag2 fail. This is how I was able to find out how can I turn the starter and the prop rotates and the starter makes it sound and it looks like it's trying to start, but then it doesn't start. How can I create that scenario where it doesn't actually fire? Like it turns over but doesn't actually fire. Well, the way to do it is you set your mag fails, mag1 and mag2, you set them to both fail, and then it'll never start until you take that fail away, and then boom, it starts right back up, right? So that's what I'm going to do here is we are going to, if it's cold out, we're gonna fail these mags, but only when you start, only when you hit the ignition key over and it turns over, we'll fail the mags until, you know, we'll call it 6 seconds. So till after 6 seconds has passed, then we'll take the flags off, the fail flags, we'll take those off, and then it should start right up, right? So we have a timer involved. Remember, 6 seconds. So there is a data ref here that's a pretty cool data ref called sim time frame period. Okay, if you create this timer function or this timer strategy that I'm going to show you, then you can use this data ref to actually start counting a timer. I call it a one-shot timer. So it's going to basically start at 0 and it's going to count up every second until it hits a point, and then from that point you can make something else happen, right? And then throttle ratio all. So I thought it would be cool. Right now you can sit in the 172 and start it right up, and it'll fire right up, and you can have that throttle pulled all the way out, right? But in the checklist, you're supposed to crack that throttle about a half inch or whatever. Especially when it's cold out, you want to crack that throttle open just a little bit. That helps it get started. So we're gonna add that into the ifs, right? So like if it's cold out, if you're starting the thing, then put the magneto fails on, and if the throttle is all the way closed or pulled all the way out, then still keep the magneto fail flags on, right? Only take those magneto flag fails off and start the counter up towards 6 if the throttle's pushed in a little bit. So all those things is what I want to do. Now, I just rattled that off from my brain, but it's better if you come in here and you just go -- open, and then you start typing. You just start your whole paragraph. It's like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want blah, 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 blah. And you don't even worry about syntax. You just type it out, because if you can clearly type it out, then you can clearly code it based on a bunch of trial and error. Now, I'm probably not going to... It's not realistic to get this right the first time you code it, right? You're gonna leave stuff off. You're going to have it coded in a way where the behavior isn't exactly like you want it, so you're going to have to modify some of the ifs. You're going to have to put things inside of other ifs and elses and stuff to make it all work the way you want. But that's why FlyWithLua is cool, because it's a quick trial and error, because you don't have to keep reloading the aircraft. You just go up to FlyWithLua and hit reload all Lua scripts, and you can try again, and it's like, it takes 1 second to reload that and try the new behavior. So let's get to it. Function, we're making a new bucket here, right? And we'll call this one, let's call it cold start. Cold hard start, that's what we'll call it. Cold hard start, right? It's function cold hard start. There it is. So we're gonna do some ifs, okay, behind some elses. So what I'm gonna do is copy this, and I'm gonna move this down. I'm gonna paste it right here. I'm gonna comment it out just so I can see what I called things, right? So if, let's set up our conditions. If the oil temp 0 is less than 33. So oil temperature pretty much follows exactly what you set your air temperature for when you go into your weather settings and you set your outside air temperature. It pretty much matches the same thing. Okay, I know that because I tested it when I was figuring out what these data refs do. So if I set my outside air temperature to 18 degrees, it's going to quickly drop down your oil temperature to 18 within a matter of seconds. So if oil temperature 0 is less than, we'll call it 33, that means it's freezing out. Let's see, and So this is the AND statement. You can nest a bunch of things in this one if, right? So if oil temperature 0 is less than 33, and starter hit, we'll talk about that in a second. Starter hit equals 1. Starter hit is, that means that, so there's more than one ways to skin a cat here. If starter hit equals 1, that means you're trying to start. Okay. If you let go of the starter key and it springs back to the both magneto position, then starter hit equals 0. So I could have put ignition key data ref, and like ignition key position 4 is the same as starter hit 1, but then you have to spring ignition key back to 3 on your own, or it'll hold itself over to 4, and that's just some extra code that I don't want to deal with. So if they've already got something that it doesn't even mess with the key itself, it's just a read. This is just a read data ref that says, is the starter being hit? Is the starter being engaged? So if starter if oil temperature is less than 33 and the starter is being engaged, let's see, then put on the magneto fail flags. So then mag 1 fail equals 6, mag 2 fail equals 6. Now 6, what does that mean? Well, your failures, 6 means, so in your failure data refs, 0 means it's not failed at all. 6 means it's totally failed. 1 through 5 have other conditions. So like they would be set for like instructional reasons. So like 1 would be fail it, but only after so many minutes. 2 would be like fail it, but after an average amount of time, but on some random time. 3 would be set it to fail, after so many hours. They have different conditionals based on different numbers, but 0 is not failing at all. 6 is fail it right now immediately, right? So if it's cold out and we're trying to start it, then put on these mag fails, right? So the next thing would be, however, else if, right? So else if is a thing where it's like, else, so if this condition is not true, then under this same if, start another if, right? So else if is just like, if this isn't true, then move on to this one, but keep it in the same conditional. It's a little bit hard to explain, but just stay with me here. So else if oil temp 0 is less than 33 and starter hit equals 1 and throttle. So the throttle data ref is right here, throttle ratio all. That's a catch-all data ref that would operate every throttle that you have on your aircraft. The other data ref I could have used that would do the exact same thing as throttle ratio with a 0 on the end. That's an array data ref. So that would be the first engine or engine 1 or the only engine that's on the 172. So throttle ratio with a 0 is the exact same engine as throttle ratio all. It would be the all encompassing. So I just use throttle ratio all. So if oil temperature P is less than 33 and starter hit equals 1 and throttle is greater than, I don't know, let's see. So it's 0 to 1. 1 is full throttle, 0 is no throttle, and we want it cracked about a ½ inch. So I'm going to say 0.15. So if throttle ratio is 0.15, then that reminds me, I'm going to go ahead and define that. So if throttle is greater than or less than 0.15. So if this one's less than 0.15 and this one's going to be greater than or equal to. So if I put this one as less than 0.15 and I put this one as more than 0.15, then 0.15 is never actually getting defined. So if you happen to land on 0.15 exactly, it wouldn't actually do anything. So you have to, one of these has to be equal to or greater than or equal to or less than, right? So, or greater than or equal to. So if the oil temperature and the starter hits on and the throttle is greater than 1.5, now is where we want it to do some awesome stuff. Then if the timer, we'll call the timer cold timer. If cold timer is greater than 6, so if this cold timer in seconds is greater than 6 seconds, then mag1 fail equals 0, mag2 fail equals 0 means take them off, and then it's going to start. Else mag1 fail equals 6, mag2 fail equals 6, end that. Oh, and then we'll end this. And then we'll end this function. Alright, so what do we got here? We've got this if-else end is ended. So basically, it checks for this condition to be true. If it's not, it goes on to this condition. If this condition's true, it's going to run this if. And if the cold timer is greater than 6, then take your mag fails off, else leave them on, right? And then, so now we want to actually make the timer function and inject it into this thing. So that's basically the logic, and I think I'm pretty close to right on this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go cold timer. We're going to call this cold timer. Cold timer equals, remember we have this other data ref that's 1 second. It's called 1 second. Cold timer equals itself plus 1 second. I think I have 1 second. Yep. Cold timer equals cold timer plus 1 second, right? We have to eject that into this part. Why? Because we don't actually want the timer to start unless this is true. If it's cold out and you're starting and your throttle is ready to roll, then start the timer, right? So I have to actually put the timer as a 0 for it to start from somewhere. So I have to define cold timer as 0 before we actually start the timer, right? So that's a flag that you put out. You put out your timer flag outside your bucket, right? So we're going to go cold timer equals 0. We'll put that outside the bucket. That'll actually start counting from 0 all the way up through 6, and when it's greater than 6, it's going to take the fails off. If it's not greater than 6, it's going to leave the fails on, right? So I think that's pretty much it. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So remember, I've got a giant if, else if, and end here. Here's the if, which is the first time it checks for anything to be true. If it's cold out, and your throttle's back. Set your fails. That's it. That's going to happen. Else if it's cold out, and your starter's hit, and your throttle's up, then we're going to have this timer start once the starter's hit. It's going to count up to 6, and when it does count up to 6, it's going to take the mag fails off, right? Else it's going to leave the mag fails on. Now, I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to make that do every frame. What did we call it? We called it cold hard start. Right? There we go. I'm going to save it. I'm going to push play. I'm going to check it. Looks good. And I'm going to come in here and we're going to check out the behavior of this dude. Right? So I'm going to come in here and make sure I'm cold on my weather. Yeah, so I've got temperature down to 15, right? I'm going to apply changes. Reload scripts one more time just for good measure, right? And I'm going to put my mixture in. I'm going to leave my throttle out. Now, if this works like it should, it's not going to start at all. 5, 6. Yeah. That's well past 6 seconds. It didn't start at all. Cool, right? So if I crack this throttle in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Starts right up. Looks like it's working great. Right? Now, let me show you another thing we can do to just kind of view what's happening, right? So if I come in here, I can do what's called log message. This is great. This is one thing I love about FlyWithLua is you can keep track of so many things if you use your debugging facilities correctly. What the heck does that mean? Well, I'm about to show you. There's this thing called log, I think it's, yeah, log MSG, right? With a capital M, log MSG with a capital N, and basically you can print out things, all right? So I could print this to say, your timer should be rolling. Right? Push save. Reload this script. Right? Now, leave that throttle out because I don't want it to start right now. I'm going to look at the, now I'm going to pull up the dev console. Now watch down here as I start. Oh, that didn't actually work. Let's see what's going on. I might have to jump in another aircraft and jump back in here. Yeah, it should. What should happen? Oh, you know why? Because I left the throttle out. I left the throttle out, and so I never actually made it down to that condition. Let's try it again. Put the throttle in this time to where the timer should be counting, right? And watch right down here. Your timer should be rolling, right? So it gives you a readout of your text. So that's pretty cool. So what do I actually want to see? Well, I actually want to see the seconds. I want to see the seconds as they count by. So instead of log messaging a string or some sort of arbitrary thing that I want it to say when it does that, I could just type in cold timer without the quotes because I'm not actually doing a string. I actually want it to log message the actual value of the cold timer when it happens. So let's check it out. We'll reload the scripts here, jump back in. Oh, now what? There it is. See how it's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if let's see, I think it's F1 and F2. Yeah. So F1 pulls the throttle out. So I'm going to leave the throttle out, right? Now you notice how the numbers aren't moving. But if I crack the throttle, the numbers start moving and then I can pull it back out. Numbers start moving and I can pull it back out. Right? So you notice that this isn't resetting to 0, right? So let's see what happens here. Let me get rid of that. I've taught you how to do that. So let's see what happens. It should take me 6 seconds. But it fires right up. It fires right up because we never reset cold timer to 0. So we have to do that somewhere, right? So if I reset it to 0 inside this if, then that would be a problem because it would never actually, well, let's just do it and I'll show you why. So cold timer equals 0 is actually where I want to reset it back to after this condition has happened, right? So if, else, if, then do this condition, right? And let's say we put it here, right? This is not going to work, but we need to know why. And so I'm just trying to explain why it matters to put these things in the right spot. Watch it work, and it's going to make a liar out of me. Okay, so it's probably not going to start, hopefully. Yes, and it's never starting, and I'll tell you why. Look at the dev console. See how it never wants to, it's getting reset to 0 on every frame? That's because it's inside this if part, right? We have to get it outside of this if part and in this if else if part, right? So let's put it, here. This makes the most sense to me. Come on. Well, let's grab it again. This makes the most sense to me. Why? Is because if all this happens, then do all this. But when none of this is happening, reset my cold timer back to 0. So, FlyWithLua, reload all scripts. Make sure the throttle's in. Turn on the mags. So it's still doing it. It's resetting it back to 0. So let's put it here. Still doing it. Oh, wait. Let's change aircraft. Again, sometimes I have to change aircraft because it's just being buggy. It like doesn't completely let go of some of the things that you had. Try one more time here. If not, then we definitely got something wrong with our code. Yeah, there's definitely something wrong with the code. So, let's figure this out. Okay, I already see it. If this, else if, do all this, and then we're not giving this an else, right? That's our problem, is that we're just saying, and also reset the cold timer to 0 at the end of it. We're not saying else if none of this is happening. This isn't an else, and it should be. But right now it's just going to do it no matter what the condition because it's just thrown in there. So that's our problem. So this is going to turn into an if, else, and then end situation, right? There. Now, the else on here means if this is not true, and if all this isn't true, then set it to 0, right? So let's do that. We'll reload it. And this is part of coding, guys. It's just you have to work it out, figure it out, and keep trying different things. This is real. This is real. How it goes. All right, so now it's counting up. If I let go and then start again, it starts again from 0. If I let go, start again, it starts again from 0. This is exactly what I want. The only time it won't start again from 0 is if your oil temperature is above freezing. But if it's not above freezing, it's going to start again. It takes like 6 seconds to start, right? Pretty cool. That's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to show you for this tutorial. You've learned how to do timers. You've learned how to set up a timer based on this sim time frame rate period data ref. You notice I've got a lot of these as read-only. That's because if I'm not going to write to them, if I'm not going to change them, I'm just reading from them, then use them as read-only. And the reason you want to do that is because, like I said, it just saves every fractional amount of performance, right? And that's it. So the truth is I could go up here and I could change some of these to read-only as well. Like, we're not writing to aircraft speed, right? We're just reading what the aircraft speed is. So I could come up here and I could change this one to read only. You know, things like that. Just going back and making sure everything you have is like optimized. Make sure your do oftens are do oftens and not do every frames if you don't need them to be. This cold hard start would definitely have to be do every frame though. That's it. You learned about log message, so you learned how to debug. You could put this log message stuff anywhere in your script, and the more you put it, the more debugging you would be able to do yourself if things go wrong. So for example, like, we could do if this, and then I could come in here and I could go else, and then I could do log message, and I could write myself a note that if none of this happened, then custom scenario could not be loaded because you are not cold and dark, homie. Right? Close that, and I could push start, and then developer, make sure my dev console is on, and let's get a non-cold and dark start. And there it is. Custom scenario could not be loaded because you are not cold and dark, right? And it's going to keep repeating that, which is not the behavior we want. And you have to put that behind a thing that's what's called a boolean or another flag. So we could put this behind another flag. So like log message, and then when log message happens, you could just make this a flag, like you know, call it debug flag. Debug flag equals true, and we could start it up here with debug flag equals false, right? That's, we put a flag at the bucket that said, you know, raise when you do the message, and then we could make this an if, else if debug flag equals false, then there we go. Now we've set this up to where it should only log this one time because it's gonna raise this flag, and then it'll never log it again. So let's test that real quick and then we'll be done. Reload. There it is. Could not be loaded because you are not cold and dark, homie. And it only says it once because I put the flag up, right? There you go. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope it makes sense. And we'll keep going on with the next video. I think on the next video, or maybe in the next couple, soon we're going to get into IMGUI, which is the graphical user interface for making all kinds of different programs that where you can make checkboxes and buttons, and you can have people input things, and you can show values on a menu that people can see, and it's also VR compatible, and it loads up in VR just fine, and you can move it and scale it, and you can stretch it to whatever size you want. You can position it wherever you want in the cockpit. In VR, it works great with VR controllers, and you can create. At that point, the world is your oyster on things you can create, but we'll go over that. There is a tutorial script for that in the FlyWithLua scripts when you download the latest version. But unless you know what you're reading, unless you know how to do what we just did in this video, it's going to be hard to understand what's going on in that video. So we'll build up to all that, and we'll get to where you guys are writing some neat things that are showing up on a menu, or you guys are even writing some custom things just for yourselves to just keep track and monitor, whatever you want during your flights. All right, guys. Also, I will show you how to have custom sounds do things, so you'll be able to hear custom sounds. Really cool stuff. We'll get into it soon. Hope you guys enjoy.